Hey everybody, welcome. Thanks so much for attending our April Lunch and Learn for the Flood Resilience Network. Today's topic is how the City of Kingston is improving their flood preparedness through the installation of a new USGS river gauge on the Rondout Creek, and also how they utilize the Stevens Flood Advisory System for coastal flooding. So we're bringing together both the river and tidal flooding, and we have three great speakers today. So if you could just take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat, so we can see who all is in the room today. And I will go through a few updates and announcements before we get started. So this spring, we've been working with a class of graduate students to understand how flood resilience is being advanced throughout the Hudson Valley. They've done some interviews and they're going to be presenting the results of their research on Friday, May 8th from noon to 1, and we'll send out registration for that in the coming days. Registration is currently open for a workshop on June 11th called Building Trust Through Community-Led Flood Resilience Planning. And so we're going to bring in some outside expertise for an interactive session featuring presentations and facilitation by Climate Migration Network and the Grand Calais Dulac tribe from coastal Louisiana. The idea behind this workshop is that we know co-designing projects with residents and community partners is really challenging, but it also leads to greater buy-in and many other benefits. So the discussion will really focus on how things can go wrong and provide some strategies for building trust and effective partnerships. In 2 weeks, we'll be kicking off the second Flood Resilience Network Land Use Leadership Alliance training cohort with the communities of North Greenbush, Stanford, New Lebanon, and Hurley, as well as representatives from Rockland and Ulster County. So we're excited about that. And then looking ahead to fall, we're going to be planning an in-person meeting and site visit to tour a flood mitigation project probably in September. And we're also going to be hosting for the second time our Risk and Crisis Communication for Flood Readiness training in partnership with Dr. Danielle Eisman. So that's going to be on October 6th in Westchester County, at the Westchester County Center in White Plains, and October 7th at the Columbia County Emergency Services Training Facility near Hudson, New York. So save the date for that. And the best way to stay in the loop for all this programming is to become a member or a partner if you haven't already by filling out the appropriate form. And just a reminder that members are municipal representatives and partners are agency folks, consultants, and regional practitioners. So let's get to our three speakers today. They're going to present one after another, and then we'll hold questions until the end. So kicking us off today is Julie Noble, the City of Kingston Sustainability Coordinator.
Thanks, Jess. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm honored to be part of this.
Julie, can you share your screen?
Yeah.
We don't see your screen.
Oh, here you go.
Yeah, you don't have video on, Julie.
I can put video on as well. All those things can happen. All right. So now you should be able to see me and my screen. We good? Great. All right. Well, I'm Julie Noble. I'm the Sustainability Coordinator for the City of Kingston, and I'm happy to be presenting this information with a team of colleagues that have been so helpful to the city, and hopefully this will help other communities be able to do just what we did. So the City of Kingston is a municipality located on the Hudson River. I know folks are from all over the valley on this call, but we're in Ulster County at the base of the Catskill Mountains, and we are surrounded by water, two tidal bodies of water, the Hudson River and the Rondout Creek. So we have influences for flooding from both of those and from sea level rise from both of those. We also have the Esopus Creek to our north, but today I'll be talking about the Rondout and the Hudson. We have seen increased flooding more and more in the last decade plus, beginning with some major flooding back during Sandy and Irene, We have really started to take notice of the effects that it has on our major cultural areas, on our residential areas, on our recreational areas, on our waterfront. And there's a number of people on the call today that have participated in lots of different plans and studies and programs and things to help us to really address how we will be resilient and be able to be a vibrant community into the future. So you can see some photos here about, again, a decade or more ago, about some flooding that we were seeing at the time from big storms. But it's not anymore just a decade ago, it's regular. And so you'll see photos here of businesses and institutions and roads and infrastructure. These photos were from 23, 24, 25. You see a picture of our mayor here rescuing a fuel tank in the middle of the road. And things like this have become more common. You'll see homes here and religious institutions and marinas and roads that have become more and more inundated and at risk. And we have been facing this issue of how do we maintain this community, this character of our community that is connected to the river and has been for the life of the community. Our community was built up on being connected to the river and the extraction industry on the river, ice harvesting and brick making and all different things related to the river. And we want to maintain that, but we're also seeing at risk. And at the same time, we're seeing complacency by folks because it happens so often. So you'll see pictures of folks and incidents of folks driving through the water because it's there often. And you'll see that here right in the middle of the picture. And when it happens so often, we have repetitive loss. But it's also really hard for us to maintain that sense of place by retreating. And so we haven't looked to retreat. We've looked to try to find solutions that include staying in place and working on how to understand and alert our community so that they are the most prepared. One of the tools that we use is the Stevens Flood Advisory System through the Stevens Institute, and my colleague Philip Orton is on the call, and he'll be presenting after in just a little moment. But one of these tools that we use and that I use as the Sustainability Coordinator is the Stevens Flood Advisory System. And if you haven't used it before, it's a publicly accessible tool. And Philip will go into it more later. But generally, we choose our most local location, which has a stream gauge. And this is the plan of how we would address flooding before our new Rondout stream gauge, which I'll get to in a moment. But we still use this tool. So our closest location that I reference is Norrie Point. And so we bring up the tool, I make sure it's in the NAVD88 datum so that we're looking at levels of data that are equal across all different systems. And this is what it normally looks like. High tide, low tide, no issues. It's not in the near flood level. It's not in the minor flood level, the moderate flood level. This system shows both actual observations and forecasts when available, or has historically. And so generally, if I take a look at this and it's in the white section, I'm okay. We're good. We move on. Everything is good. Sometimes, however, when the forecast is looking like we're going to have flooding, we will see images like this. And so we have it set up in the system where I can get an alert, and anyone can do this. And you can get this alert or look out at this system 4 days in advance, and it will show you, hey, this is the prediction of what's going to happen. And so you'll see this was back in December 23rd, 2022, from when some of those photos were from the flooding. And you'll see on that top picture there that the forecast was greatly out of the white section, right there all the way up to the moderate flood level. And we also looked at the surge and model error to understand where more influences would be. This was coupled with New York alerts, which we also received that would come out to say, we've got flood warnings coming into effect. And circumstances like this would lead us to a response on the waterfront. A response may look like me calling the fire department or the police department or the Department of Public Works or the wastewater treatment plant, or emailing them or texting and saying, hey, the forecast looks like this 4 days out. We might want to start preparing. And sometimes it's not as grand. Sometimes, like this event here, which was in 2021, the forecast didn't go all the way up to moderate. We didn't issue any kind of massive response. And you'll see on the right, there was a major event going on at one of our facilities on our waterfront with with a lot of tourists, and they came back to their cars underwater. And that was not a great day here in the city of Kingston, but it gave us a great learning experience, which is we need more localized data. We need actual data to understand what's happening right here and to understand how we can have a better response. Here's the 21 versus 22. Something else that's unique here in Kingston is that I'm not just looking at Norrie Point, because I mentioned in the beginning, we're on the Hudson and we're on the Rondout. So we have the tidal Hudson River, and we also are on a section of the Rondout Creek that's tidal. But what we have realized is that when there's flooding up watershed and it's coming down the Rondout Creek, we're also seeing that influence, confounding whatever's happening on the Hudson. So you'll see on the bottom right corner in 2022, which is when we had that huge spike, this is what the gauge at the Rondout Creek at Rosendale was going to do. So taking into consideration all these things, what's happening in Norrie Point? What's happening in Rosendale? How is this going to impact us on the Kingston waterfront? So many unknowns, which have led to confusion and challenges with communication, and lots of times where we are put in a place where we have things underwater. In just a section of time, over 10 months, we started creating this flood alert plan. And as I mentioned in the beginning, when I would see an alert or I would see a forecast, I would reach out to the local marina, the superintendent of Department of Public Works, our building safety folks, and other institutional leads right on the Hudson River waterfront. So like the Maritime Museum, there's a trolley museum there. Mostly higher level response teams, including our communications director and our mayor. But when folks started understanding that this was happening and that there was information to be shared and that it was data driven, by October of 23, that number of people that wanted to get these alerts started to grow, including our radio stations, our engineer, the cruise systems, our restaurants. People wanted to know, how are they going to protect themselves? And all of this is mindful of, wait a second, this is just Julie looking at a forecast, trying to compare multiple locations to hope that I'm predicting it the right way, and then giving people information that isn't inciting a fire and causing a lot of confusion or danger or mobilizing people that don't need to, or not mobilizing. And all of this worked and still is working for a little while, but there needed to be a better solution.
Okay, I will move my.
So here were some of the limitations. One, the onus was on one person, me, to regularly check the forecasts, mostly weekdays, as on my job. I can't be expected to save the world 24 hours a day. And if I was away or busy, there's no redundancy. And just as a reference, I'll just give a real life example. Last week I was in Hilton Head, South Carolina. I got one of these alerts and no one was here to getting those alerts. And I don't really know what happened while I was away in South Carolina, but I got the alert in the middle of the night. It woke me up and I said to myself, dang, there should be redundancy, so I don't have to be interrupted on my vacation. But we're getting there. Other limitations, the forecast data is based on the Hudson River forecast, as I mentioned, not accounting for the Rondout Creek influences. The recommended actions, which might be something like you should use sandbags or put on your floodgates or evacuate your building, were based on anecdotal evidence. So, hey, we remember back a couple of years ago, it got kind of high flooding in this time, and if it's going to be like that now, it's probably going to flood, so you might want to leave your place. The referenced elevations were anecdotal. So again, we would think to ourselves, all right, well, during Sandy and Irene, it got to this part on the road, and if that was 8 feet elevation of water, then that means if this is forecasting 8 feet, it's going to get to that part in the road again. All of that being anecdotal. The recommendations being made were non-official, discretionary, and subjective. So it was a couple of us in our response team saying, you know, I think the Maritime Museum really should sandbag, or we think Old Savannah Restaurant really should not have that big event in it. Or we think the wastewater treatment plant should probably install their floodgates because the forecasts are telling us that these other places in our region might have this flooding, so we should prepare. None of this was meant to be directed towards the public. And so since then, we've actually created a much separate plan, and comprehensive emergency management plan and hazard mitigation plan to understand how and when we communicate with the public so that we are communicating effectively and at the right time. And we need to find more ways to communicate via email than just email. So all this came together, and for several years, we were looking to install a more localized, more precise data gathering system specific to Kingston. And we were aware that several years ago, probably more than a decade ago, maybe 2 decades ago, early 2000s, there was a USGS stream gauge on the Rondout Creek. It was funded for a very short period of time. My understanding was by the Department of Environmental Conservation, but we couldn't figure out how to fund it to keep it going. It is not a free system. Installing it is not free. And the city, up till very recently, hadn't prioritized paying for it. And we had brought together, including members of our Conservation Advisory Council and other stakeholders on our waterfront, thinking what other stakeholders would benefit from this? Well, frankly, everyone would benefit from it, but not everyone's willing to fork up the money. So ultimately, the city came and we used ARPA funding to work with USGS, and we have entered into a 5-year agreement to install a Rondout Creek, to reinstall the Rondout Creek stream gauge. It was installed in July of this past year. And it's got great features. I'm going to let Andrew get into some of the features that it's got. But what I really love is that I can look live at it for the photos, for live images. That was an option that we chose. We could choose to have live imagery or not. We chose to have that because I like to have available to me and to our public a comparison that you may be able to look at to say, okay, well, right now that bridge abutment looks like that. But I know when it gets to 8 feet or higher than 8 feet, that bridge abutment is gone. And so you could see from remotely what's going on exactly on the Rondout. We had an option to choose either velocity or stage. So stage is the depth of the water. We just chose stage. We thought that was the most important feature that we wanted to understand for how deep the water was on the Rondout. And now we have a new system. The Sustainability Coordinator, that's me. I still receive the SFAS, the Stevens system, 4 days out. If that minor level flood is forecast at 4 feet, NAVD 88, that's the datum that is used at Norrie Point, I initiate that same alert plan. But now we also don't need to do as much calculation because we can now see that there are live notifications or would be live notifications from USGS. So for instance, as I mentioned last week when I was away, I noticed that, or got the alert that the Norrie Point was going to be forecast high. And then I got the notification from the USGS right in Kingston. So I knew that there was flooding and action going on right on our waterfront. So I review the data, the site for the data, and understand the flood stage. And then our response is activated based on those levels. What's great is that they use a system called HIVIS, Hydrologic Imagery Visualization and Information System, and Andrew will go into that in a little bit. But it's over time, we're able to see snapshots, we're able to see depths, we're able to see trends, we're able to use this information to also couple it with the other systems available, like the SFAS, which we've used, to really understand what's happening on our specific location. And it also lets us see historic data beyond, or will let us see historic data once we have that in place. So that's a little primer into what we've got going on here. I'm going to let the data experts tell you more about how these things all work. But I hope that folks know that if Kingston can do it, you can all do it. It's not a ton of money. It's an incredibly easy process. It was literally just an agreement with USGS. They did all the installation, they did everything, and the data is immediately available. And this not only helps Kingston, but it is now helping the other communities because it's another data point in the system that has real live data for flooding, which is so helpful for us and more going forward. So thank you. I'll stop there.
Great. Thanks so much, Julie, for that overview. And now we're going to head right into Andrew Waite, who is the Network Operations Manager from the USGS New York Water Science Center. So take it away, Andrew.
All right. Thank you very much, Jess. Appreciate that. Can you see my screen okay?
Oh, sorry. We're not seeing the screen.
Not yet. Let me do this. And all right, how about there? Can you see it now?
Yep. Looks good.
All right, great. Super. Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Like Jess said, I'm the Network Operations Manager for the USGS in New York. And basically what I do is I help oversee Gage operations sort of at a large scale for the state. I also deal with all of our cooperators, our funding partners, and work with funding agreements, et cetera. So first thing I want to do is give a shout out and thanks to the City of Kingston for partnering with us to get this Gage back up and running. This Gage was, like was said earlier, this Gage was in operation several years ago. So it's really nice to have data being collected here again. So the things we want to talk about today, and I'll try to keep within my time constraints. We want to talk about the New York Center, our Gage network at large. We want to talk about various Gage types that we have. How we're modernizing our gauging network. USGS has been gauging for 100+ years, and what are we doing today to modernize our network? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. How do we access the data that we all might be looking for? So we'll go through some screenshots of the website to figure out how to access data. We'll talk about the water alert system, and then if folks have interest in new stream gauges, how do they inquire about it and get more information on that? So we'll cover all these things hopefully fairly quickly. All right, so this is our basic gauge network throughout the whole state. It's a fairly dense network, and it includes about in round numbers, just over 300 stream flow gauging stations, about 90 water level only or stage only gauges, which of course this Kingston gauge, Rondout Creek, is one of those. We have about 210-ish groundwater wells that monitor continuous groundwater levels. We have well over 1,000 groundwater wells that are more discrete, so we only sample those monthly and annually for water levels, and typically those are on Long Island. We also have 80+ water quality sites with various water quality components that we collect and process, and then we have several meteorological sites spread throughout the state as well. We collect precipitation, air temperature, wind speed, etc. So a couple of different real quick snapshots of some of the gauges. This is a gauge that has been around for a long time. This is a stilling well type of gauge. It's large in scale. It's got lots of concrete, lots of footprint. It's got a walk-in shelter. We have some mechanical sensing equipment inside here. Basically, the way it works is if you take when the water in the river rises, the water floods through these intake pipes into our stilling well. The water in the stilling well rises, and then we have a float system that rises and falls with the water, and it actuates a mechanical device on the shelf called a shaft encoder, and that's what this is over here. This is a schematic of a shaft encoder, and so this is sort of the historical type of gauge that we've had. As we move forward, our footprint has become quite a bit smaller and more compact, and we're going with pressure systems and non-contact sensors to measure water levels. So this is a very typical gauge that we have now. A couple different examples of a standalone gauge that has a pressure sensor on the right-hand side. There's a pressure sensor in there. There's all of our gauges generally are 12-volt systems. Some of them are powered by solar, like you can see here in the left picture. A lot of them are powered by AC power, depending on the power needs. But these are very typical gauge installs right now. Some of the other types of equipment that we use are, for example, a non-contact radar stage sensor. We try, if we can, to put in non-contact sensors because, as was mentioned earlier, if you have a flood and you have big old trees coming down the river, you can put all the pipes you want in the river and they're going to get damaged and torn out. So we do try to put some non-contact sensors out there. We have over here on the right-hand side, these are called acoustic Doppler velocity meters. So we have a handful of sites where water level does not relate to discharge in a standard way, right? And if we were collecting discharge at this Rondout Creek site, this site would qualify because when the water goes up, generally there's more flow. But if you have backwater from the Hudson River, let's say, you could have an increased water level, but you wouldn't necessarily have increased flow. So we have to use specialized equipment if we're collecting discharge data at a site that has variable backwater, we call it. In addition, we have reference gauges. If you're familiar with USGS gauges, you might have seen some of these. These are staff gauges out here. It basically looks like a glorified ruler in the water. And what that does is it allows our field folks to compare a surveyed staff gauge water surface elevation to what's being recorded by our data loggers to confirm that everything's working well. And then finally, this crest stage gauge, a CSG. This is a fairly low-tech device, but what it does is it records an annual peak water level for us. And we take that annual peak water level and we compare that to our recorded peak water level on our data logger to make sure everything looks good. So we have many ways to validate our data and to quality assure it. So these are some of the very traditional tools that we use. As far as modernizing our network, we are really starting to put out webcams everywhere. Julie had mentioned that there's a webcam, of course, at the Rondout site. We are making webcams essentially standard equipment for all of our gauges. And for every new gauge that we put in, like the Rondout, webcams are essentially standard equipment. For our existing network of hundreds of gauges, we're starting to upgrade those. So I'm guessing we probably have over 100 webcams out there now, ballpark. So this is something that's going to essentially take over our network, which is fantastic. It gives us situational awareness. We can, for example, this picture on the left, you can easily see, is the water flowing over the wall or is it not? It helps us detect ice conditions. They are starting to be used to actually make discharge measurements. I'll talk about that in a second. And we do have a couple very specific specialized cameras that measure thermal signatures in the water. We have a couple of projects where we're looking for like cold water, groundwater infiltration into the stream. And so these type of thermal cameras help us with that. As far as we call measuring discharge with cameras, the USGS is very good at long terms being made acronyms. LSPIV, large scale particle image velocimetry. And so what we can do is we can take camera videos and we can look at the surface velocity on a camera video and we can compare that to control points that have been surveyed and identified on the stream banks. And we can generate not only surface velocities from that, but with bathymetry data and other characteristics of the site, we can generate discharge using videos from cameras. So we are investing heavily in cameras being used for this also. And this, not every site is conducive to it, but many are. And so we're trying to use this so that we can initiate remote discharge measurements. So usually a discharge measurement involves a person either in the river, on a boat, on a bridge, something like that. If we can use cameras to make discharge measurements remotely, it could be a flip of a switch and we have a remote measurement without somebody being at the site. And that's critical for periods where we have high flows, where it's difficult to get people to sites. Maybe you have road closures, or maybe a flood happens at 4 a.m. and people aren't out of bed yet. Anyhow, we also have over here on the right non-contact surface velocity radars. And these are starting to become more commonplace, but these are special radars that measure not only the water level, but the water velocity. So they use a radar signal to measure velocity rather than a video, like in the middle pictures there, to measure velocity, but they work on the same principle. We get a surface velocity, and through surveying, bathymetry, and other site characteristics, we can back out discharge from that. Again, a non-contact sensor. In addition, to make our webcams function, we need cellular service, so that's becoming ubiquitous, and it also allows us to do some troubleshooting on our gauges remotely as well, having two-way communications with our gauges. This is something that we just recently have developed in New York. This is what we're calling a flood stage gauge. And it looks, if you just look at the box, it kind of looks like a standard gauge. But what it is a gauge that sits idle until a certain threshold is exceeded. So, for example, the picture on the left, if the water got up to a certain level that was of interest to us, to the weather service, to a cooperator, then we could have the gauge automatically activated, and it would start collecting data through a period of high flow or high water level, and it would transmit those data. And as soon as the high water level has come and gone, then the gauge would turn itself off. So the goal here is to collect some good high water level data, but have a low cost gauge, because it's frankly not doing much recording other than at high flows. So that's one of our goals here as well. In addition, what we envision doing with these, we haven't got there yet, but what we're envisioning doing with these is tying these to the National Weather Service flood warning system. So, for example, if we had 10 of these gauges, hypothetically, in a county, and that county had a flood warning issued, these gauges, in theory, would turn on automatically, collect data through the flood, and then turn themselves off. And by collect data, what I mean is collect data and transmit it. So it would all be real-time data. So that's where we're headed with these flood stage gauges, but these are a pretty new development, and we only have a few prototypes out there right now collecting data. So this is a super cool thing we're trying to get out the door. We're also doing our best to embrace and really kind of kick the doors open with AI and artificial intelligence. We're trying to use AI to do a lot of different things. Anomaly detection. So if we see one gauge that we expect to behave a certain way, and yet it seems different than we'd expect, we're trying to use AI to look at our gauge network as a network rather than just an individual gauge. And so we can do a lot of things with that. We can if we see an anomalous gauge, we can trigger certain things. For example, a remote site, I'll call it a site inspection, but a remote inspection of a staff gauge to make sure our recorders are working properly. We can also trigger remote discharge measurements with cameras, and we can potentially look at making adjustments to our data based on those remote inspections on the fly. And so that's what we're doing here with AI, and we're just at the cusp of getting a lot of this stuff operational, but we're working with this significantly. As far as data access, and I do apologize, I'm probably talking real fast here, but I'm trying to make sure that I leave enough space for Philip when I'm done. So as far as data access, how do we get to the data that we want? There's several different ways, but I'll go through one. And this is not a live demo, so these are just screen captures. But you can go to the USGS Water Data for the Nation, WDFN, and that's the website there. And I'm sure all these URLs will be made available afterwards. But if you go to the WDFN, you can go here to the top left and you can discover real-time data in your state. So if you go down here, you could select New York. And then when you do that, you'll see a website like this on the right. And right here, you see all the gauges that are in the state that are real time. I have gauge height selected here, but you can select any parameter that you want to see: water temperature, groundwater data, etc. I have gauge height selected. If you did have discharge selected, for example, all these dots would be color coded based on their current conditions. So, for example, a green dot would indicate that the flows are generally in the normal range. Brown would be below normal, blue would be above normal. But for gauge height, if I select that, what I can do now is I can zoom in on this map to whatever gauge I'd like to see. And so over here on the left, I did just that. I zoomed into the Rondout gauge right here. And there's a few things you can get to here. First of all, you can go directly to a monitoring location page. It shows you where you're looking at right now. If I want to view data, there's a default view for 7 days right here. So if I just click this link, what that'll do is it'll jump me over to this real-time data page right here. And what you'll see up top here is you have some pre-canned selections. You can look at 7 days, 30 days, you can look at a year. But what if you want to look at 120 days? Well, you can do that too. If you come down here, there's an option for change time span. And so you can put in whatever date range you want to see. If you want to see 3 days from 5 years ago, you can go in here, change time span, and you can look at that historical data. We're going to talk in a second about the water alert system and how that can be used. So I won't go into that now. But these other 3 selections, you can view related graphs, view related data to this site. If you want to download the data, you can certainly do that here. You select your date range and you download it. And then finally, if you want to view the data records, it's basically a tabular version of what you're seeing up here pictorially in this graph. So you can see the actual values if you want to by going over here, okay? In addition, you can see up here in the plot, there's like this little dot right here. That dot right there is the values that are shown up here in this text represent that dot. So if I took that dot, I can't do it because it's a screen capture, but if you take that dot, you can drag it all over this plot as you want, and these numbers will reflect the gauge height value wherever that dot is sitting, okay? So as we move on, further down in the web page, you can see various data types that you can view. I have selected here continuous data. So if I want to look at continuous data, I can do that. I want to look at daily data, we've got that, field measurements, and so on and so forth. Any water quality data that might exist is all down here. So what I did was I selected my continuous data, and for grins and giggles, I picked discharge. I want to look at some discharge data for the Rondout Creek site. And over here, it tells you what data are available. So from 2011 to 2015, that's when we have discharge available. So if I come over here, what I can do is I can change my time span, and I can type in whatever dates I'm interested in. So I picked March 2011 to April 2013. I click change time span right here, and then you can see the data are all shown up here. And this period includes Hurricane Irene, of course. And you could do the same. I picked discharge, but you could do the same for gauge height or whatever parameter is publicly available. You can do the same type of thing for. In addition, Julie had mentioned high-vis. So if you scroll down further on the page, you'll see the image down here. And what this is it's a time-lapse view. And so you'll see a little play button down here in the bottom left corner. It'll basically, our gauges take a still image once an hour, and then you can hit play here, and it'll scroll through a time-lapse view of all of our images, or the most recent images anyway. If you want to see more images or more information about our webcams, you can click this link right here, and it will take you, like Julie said, to our high-vis page. Here, another acronym for a really long, name: Hydrologic Imagery Visualization and Information System. So high-vis. And if you click over there, you'll get to this page. Now, this is pretty slick because what you can see here is it shows you an image up top, and then it shows you a plot of data. And it shows you can see this little red dot right there in the middle. That image is taken at a time on the gauge height plot where that red dot resides. So for example, if I pull over here and I look over to the left on the y-axis, I've got a gauge height of about 4 feet. So this picture is taken at a gauge height of 4 feet. If you had a big old flood and the water level got up to 10 feet, well, you could scroll across to 10 feet and you could see what the image looked like at 10 feet. You can also come down here and you can select the date range that you want to look at different images. And our cameras are relatively new. We don't have 10 years worth of camera images. So you're not going to be able to go back a decade and see images. But for as long as they're available, you can see them right here. You can change your dates, and you can look at, for example, gauge height or discharge, whatever you want, and it will relate the image to that real-time data, which is very helpful. Water alert. If you want to, water alert's an automated notification system where any user can put in a threshold of interest to them, and the water alert system will send an automated notification. So if you subscribe to water alert right here, you can go over and you can put in your parameters. I want to see data whenever the gauge height is greater than a certain value. I want it to send me a message. So it can send me a message via email, or it'll text you on your cell phone. and you can decide if you want to see that once per day or once per hour. So you can customize this, and if 10 people had 10 different values of interest, they could do it. It's not just one person who can do that for this site, and any number of people can. A couple of reasons why we may have data availability issues. So we have 300 plus gauges throughout the state. Inevitably, some electronic gremlin's going to get in our gauge, and the gauge is going to go down. So we have equipment malfunctions. We have flood damage. You got a picture over here of a bridge that's washed out, and our gauge laying on the ground. This is from well over a decade ago, but nonetheless, it tells the story here. We have a lot of flood damage. We have gauges that, yes, people find it entertaining to burn down, that we have to rebuild. We have gauges over here that are hit by cars that we have to rebuild. We have when rivers are ice covered, the stage relation to discharge breaks down. And so oftentimes when we have ice cover, we will screen the discharge data off the web. So there's various reasons why there may be gaps in data on the web, but us rebuilding gauges, repairing gauges, doing all that stuff is all included in the O&M. There's no extra charge for us to rebuild a burned down gauge. Thankfully, that doesn't happen too often. So there are reasons. And I'm trying to bring the train into the station here real quick. We do our funding partners, we call them cooperators. And most of our funding comes from local sources. So we're a federal agency, and a lot of people tend to think that we must be federally funded. And we are a little bit, but not as much as you might think. So about 83, you can see down here, about 83% of our funding comes from local cooperators like the City of Kingston. About 17% of our funding, so far less, comes from federal appropriations. So most of our funding does come from local partners, including towns, villages, municipalities, hydropower companies, colleges, and you get the idea, fishing organizations. So there are a large entity of folks that fund us to do the work that we do. And we do get some funding, not a lot, but some funding from federal appropriations. And then finally, last slide, if you're interested in a new gauge, how do you inquire about it? Well, you can reach out to me directly. My email address is right up there. Or if you're on any one of our real-time pages, at the very bottom of the page, there's a tab called questions or comments. If you have a question or comment about that particular gauge, you can put it in there. Or if you have a question or comment about a new gauge, you can certainly write that in there. Hey, I'm interested in a new gauge on XYZ stream. And it will eventually be, within a couple hours, be routed to the New York Water Science Center, and it'll come to me. And then I will get in touch with whoever's inquiring, and we'll discuss station details, what the data needs are. I'll provide a cost estimate, and if it's agreeable, we'll go ahead like we did with the City of Kingston, and we'll generate a funding agreement for anywhere from 1 to 5 years. Generally, that's what they are. So I think that's it, and I probably went over my time. I apologize for that, but that's the last slide. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Andy. I had no idea how to use all those tools. So thanks so much for that overview.
Sure.
And you can see there's some commentary in the chat as well on how Julie was using those alerts. So now in our final 15 minutes here, we're going to move from the stream into the tidal Hudson River. And we'll hear from Philip Orton, who is a research associate professor from the Stevens Institute of Technology, to talk about his flood alert system that gets at coastal flooding.
Thank you, Jess. So I'm at Stevens. That's a picture of the Hudson and New York City in front of Stevens. We'll move quickly though on. So the 4 topics I'll cover are just what causes coastal flooding, meaning flooding of tidal waterways in the Hudson River Valley. And that is my main focus. And as the title said, I'm focused on compound flooding. By that, I mean coastal flooding as increased, areas with tides, but the combination of rainfall-driven flooding and coastal flood drivers such as tides and storm surge. So I'll talk about coastal flooding in Hudson River Valley, overview of Stevens Flood Advisory System, quick bit on different uses of SFAS and the uses of SFAS, and lastly, the challenges and a new project having to do with Kingston. So good news there too. So historically, the floods at New York City are driven by coastal storms and mainly by wind-driven storm surge and tides, Whereas when you go up the Hudson, beyond Poughkeepsie, you really start to see the rainfall as a major driver. So we had a paper in 2018 when we were, in the aftermath of Irene and Sandy, really trying to learn the historical perspective on when there have been events. And so in the top right, the top left, you see the coastal storms can be cool season storms, which we call extratropical cyclones, or tropical cyclones, which include hurricanes and tropical storms. And on the right, and so Sandy, of course, hit the ball out of the park compared to these prior storms. In the past century, there was a Category 3 hurricane in 1821 that was similar to Sandy, we know now. And then as you go up the river, more the rainfall-driven flooding mixing with the tidal flooding, the real compound flooding. It could be a mix of inland extratropical cyclones that dump a lot of rain through the watershed, and then tropical cyclones that dump a lot of rain, like 1938 hurricane's a good example. And also the river management seems like it's had been a factor in reducing the extremes that you see in the earlier part of the 20th century. Seem more common. We think that's because of river management as well as ice breaking, because you don't get the ice dams that create large floods if the ice is blocking the river. So just looking at Irene, I don't know why it jumped forward. Oh, that's funny. So anyway, Irene, I get that, actually got it to stay. Irene caused a lot of severe, as many of you know, a lot of severe river and rainfall-driven floods. Wasn't such a big flooding problem at New York City, but it's a very large storm. Here's the storm track, and I'm just going to use it as an example of what our bread and butter is at Stevens. We are more of a coastal engineering institution, so we've run for about 20 years now a NIHOPS model that has a website with currents and salinity of the water, temperature of the water, water levels, etc. And from that, we've derived something called Stevens Flood Advisory System. Because of Sandy and Irene being such large storms, we started running our own model instead of using a NOAA model for the larger scale part of the Northwest Atlantic Ocean. That's the SNAP model, Stevens Northwest Atlantic Predictions. And we also receive these models, so that's sort of our bread and butter, is these models of the tidal waterways, but then they also receive injections of water from the rivers. The Rondout River actually is included on our forecast, but it's just injected into the Hudson. There's no resolution of the floodplain and the Rondout River itself alongside Kingston, and that's really the reason we can't capture those high flood levels from when there's a rain event at Kingston. Here's an animation of the water level. Primarily what you're seeing is tides. The water level, the blues are low water, and the more yellowish and orange colors high tide. And you're seeing these arrows are the wind direction, pointing in the wind direction. That's about a 50-knot wind or 55-mile-per-hour wind when it's that length. And there's Irene making landfall right over New York City. The water levels rose due to the tides and storm surge, but then eventually there's very high water levels kind of pegged in the Hudson because of all that stream flow, all that river water rushing out because there was such massive rainfall event. So we got the water flow dynamics here, capturing tides and other factors. And that's the bread and butter, and that's what's behind SFAST. So Stevens Flood Advisory System is a regional, really the whole U.S. Northeast water level prediction system. It's not a flood mapper. We're moving in that direction, but we're not there yet. So you just get water level predictions at these marker locations, and it sends emails if you sign up. So the USGS systems are really nice. The web development there is really advanced. There's one thing I can say that we do that USGS isn't yet doing, which is that we predict the flooding in advance, so we'll send warnings of the flooding before it occurs. So we do have that advantage. But our web, we're kind of working on our website and trying to improve it. We're an academic institution, so we do a lot of this more for research, and we don't have as much funding to improve our website, unfortunately. So we give water level forecasts, I'll show on the next slide, and we also give an uncertainty range. The forecasts are for 4.5 days into the future right now. We've compared to NOAA's forecast. NOAA also does this, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And the National Weather Service uses our predictions, and they put out official forecasts, which we always recommend you look to as a municipal or entity. So moving to the next slide. So this is what's provided for each station. a 4.5 day forecast, and then also observations and looking in the rearview mirror, you've got the observations and the forecast. So the forecast is shown in the pinkish color. The uncertainty, which is a 90% confidence range, is shown in gray. So 10% of the time the water level should be, if it's a good estimate of the 90% uncertainty range, then 10% of the time the water level will actually be outside the gray area. So it's not an actual maximum possible water level or minimum passable water level. It's the 95th percentile and the 5th percentile range. So we've got the uncertainty, we've got the forecast, central forecast, and you can compare that to observations. And typically the system's pretty accurate. I won't go into details, but we have compared with NOAA, and we have a paper submitted with the most recent comparisons of different systems. And so just looking back and forth after the fact, when the observations have filled in, the forecast in this case was pretty good. But like I said, 10% of the time, the red dots, the observations, will be outside the gray shaded 90% chance confidence interval. Okay, so to speak to some user applications, and I'm going to kind of zip through this fast because we're getting low on time. We did a survey in 2024 spring. If anyone contributed to that, thank you. It was really cool to learn. This has been in place since 2007 or something like that, almost 20 years where we've had some kind of forecast, and it's gradually been improved over the years. But people all over, especially New Jersey, but up the Hudson Valley also use SFAST. And we published the user survey. And here's just some quick findings from that. A subset of 99 of the respondents were from communities, companies, or government. Common response activities include emergency management activities, as we learned from Julie, and protecting industrial equipment, et cetera. There's some storm surge or tide gates, barriers that are closed in a few places that we know of. So it's sort of part of the infrastructure of flood preparedness for the region, in addition to NOAA's forecast. And there were also household respondents. And one thing we learned is a lot of people are, changing their time that they're commuting. In places that are chronically flooded, people rely on this every month for when they can expect tidal flooding, which is relatively predictable kind of flooding. And also, without reading all these quotes, the National Weather Service uses our data. They put it alongside the federal government's best models to make their official storm, presentations and warnings and forecasts. So we have a lot of collaboration with National Weather Service. Okay, and so one challenge that we're having right now that's worth pointing out is on the Hudson. We've traditionally really were at the cutting edge on the Hudson, and we're relying on HR Ecos data, the Hudson River, I think, Ecological Observing System. But 3 of those stations are not giving data now, and they're not very reliable. So we're eventually going to take those out of the system, so there won't even be markers, we think, for those stations. And then there's a few USGS stations that need to be repaired or removed from our system if they won't be giving good data at Poughkeepsie and West Point. And then there's also new observations going in, as we've learned for USGS. There's the one at Kingston. We can add with a certain amount of effort, we can have our model output data for that location. We can create forecasts for that location and warnings. Same thing for Turkey Point's NOAA station that went in a few years ago, and for NOAA Coxsackie, which is relatively new. So we need to add those. We'll definitely be adding the Kingston one if we get this funding to work with Kingston. But and I anticipate at some point we'll be able to start removing some of these stations that haven't been giving data and adding new stations. It's a challenge for us to get funding. We're a research institution, we're not a company, so it can be hard to contract. But we currently have some funding to start building up flood mapping, so we aren't just showing you a water level relative to some datum. We actually give you a map, and people can look and see where the flooding will occur. So that's a big advancement that we're looking forward to making in the next year or so. And the new project is with Kingston. We anticipate getting the funding, but it will be a challenge to contract with the state to get the money to Stevens. It's funded by New York State Climate Smart Communities, so we're pretty excited about that. The objectives are to engage with Kingston to make sure we understand the flooding and that we represent it properly in our modeling. We'll develop an improved model that captures the Rondout River and captures the actual flooding instead of just the water levels along the Hudson. And So we'll create that operational system of computer codes, and we'll work with Kingston to develop a flood response plan for government activities when flooding is expected. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you for your time, and thanks for showing up today.
Thanks so much, Philip. Yeah, it's great to get that overview on the challenges of maintaining these systems as new data comes online and other data needs to be removed. But the Stevens flood advisory system has been very critical on the Hudson for sure. So we have a few minutes for questions. If anyone on the line has a question, I know we covered a lot, but we wanted to give you that context from Kingston. And we know that there's a lot of interest in installing USGS gauges. So really appreciate the overview from Andy. So you can either put your questions in the chat or come off mute.
Hi, Jessica. This is John Abatangelo.
Hey there.
Hey, I have a question for Mr. Waite regarding the USGS gauges. So I currently serve as the chair of the Sparkhill Creek Watershed Alliance, and this was something we were investigating for a while. We were trying to get like a gauge onto the creek. And I understand, from your presentation, my inquiry was kind of met with like the same, the same pricing about there. So it does have to get funded, and we understand that. We kind of did our own thing to kind of look into like an alternative to gauging the creek. So we basically found like a third party contractor, and we did have some grant funding that we used for it. And I noticed like one of the gauges you used in your slides was it was the ultrasonic, or I guess the radar gauge.
Yes.
Yeah, we have like a similar gauge that we're using, a down facer on like a culvert near the mouth of the Sparkhill Creek. Part of it is that it's a fairly small watershed. It's only about 11 square miles. I guess like one of the questions I had is like, given the amount of cost and like the usual time frame for going into it, is there like a cutoff that USGS has for like watershed size as to whether or not you should gauge a creek?
Not necessarily. As far as drainage area size, we might use different techniques if it's a really small site versus a really large site. But as far as the ability to gauge a small site, 11 square miles, yeah, we have sites like that as well. Yeah. So yeah, that's something that definitely, could be done.
Okay. And in terms of like, I guess the term I'm looking for. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I heard you. I missed what you said. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I guess too, in terms of like data validation, does like the USGS have like I guess like a procedure in place or something that like the public can follow if they have their own like third party collected data that they can use to like, I guess, conform the data to readings that the USGS takes in their day to day?
Yeah, so there are the reports that I'm going to reference are called techniques and methods. And so those have sort of a soup to nuts look at how we do certain functions, right? And there's techniques and methods reports for servicing stage gauges. There's techniques and methods reports for running levels and surveying gauges to USGS specs and standards. So those are all publicly available. And afterwards, I can get you a couple of links if you would like that.
Yeah, no, that would be great. I do have more questions, but I also just wanted to see if anybody else had anything first.
Yeah, we're actually at time, and so I think we'll have to end it there. But if anyone wants to stay on a little longer, I can do that. But I just want to say a huge thanks to our presenters today, Julie, Andrew, and Philip. And also thanks to our sponsor by the Hudson River Estuary Program, New York State Department of Environmental Conservation with support from the New York State Water Resources Institute at Cornell. So thanks everyone for attending and have a great day. And I can stay on a little longer if anyone else wants to.
Yeah, I could stay a couple minutes. I do have another meeting, but I told them I'd be